Hey everybody. So in this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about your research paper topics for Unbroken. So the reason I'm doing this now is because as you're reading your novels, um, you're going to want to be gathering quotes from those novels and explaining how those quotes tie into the prompt that you chose. Well, you can't read the novel and pick quotes for it if you don't even know what kind of prompt you're writing about or what your quotes are supposed to be about. So I'm giving you the prompts now, not because I expect you to work on this research paper right away, but because I want you to be thinking about what kind of possible research I might want to do for the book that I've chosen, for the prompt that I've chosen, so on and so forth. So this will help you pick quotes as you read. And that's why I'm having you do this now. It's a lot easier to pick quotes as you read if you have an idea in mind of what you want to write about than it is to read the book, then figure out what you want to write about, then try to go back through the book and figure out where was that quote again? What chapter was that on again? It's just a lot easier to have a game plan in mind first before the actual game, if you catch my drift. So here we go. So in this particular video, I'm going to talk to you about Unbroken. Now, of the choice novels that I gave you, Unbroken is unique in that it's the only one of the three that is non-fiction, which means this story actually happened. Hillenbrand, who wrote this book, she interviewed the main character, and she gathered a ton of research, newspaper articles, anything that she could get her hands on to basically tell the most complete and accurate story that she could about this gentleman and his remarkable life. So, anyway, it is the only nonfiction book in the selection. And so because of this, the other two books, those prompts were geared more towards the literary aspect of how the book was written and how that influences the reader and so on and so forth. This one isn't so much, these topics aren't so much focused on the way the book was written, more like they're more focused on the people in the book and the history behind the book. So if you like nonfiction, if you like doing research about things that actually happened as opposed to theoretical things, this might be the book for you. So anyway, let's go through this. So just like the other two books, I've given you 10 topics to choose from, and all you have to do is pick one. Okay? So this first one talks to you about basically looking at the skill set that Louis had going into World War II. You know, he was an Olympic track star, and he had a history of basically not doing what he was told, fighting against authority, um, rebellion, things like that. So, how did these skills help or hurt him in his attempts at survival through prisoner of war situation? You know, he was a prisoner of war for a while. So, how did the skill set that he had help or hurt him? Okay, so if you were doing this, you could also you could organize this in a couple of different ways. You could focus on a few skills that he possessed and then find a couple of other survivors or research a couple of other survivors from the book and talk about their skill sets, those same skill sets, and how they were similar or different to his and how it helped them or hurt them, because some of his friends died along the way. um, Maybe it's because they didn't have a certain skill that he possessed or didn't have it as high quantity as he possessed it, or whatever. So that's the first one. Okay, so the next one is talking about the idea of dignity as a basic need. Think about dignity and what is it and how is it important to human life and human um, advancement, our survival. Think about what lengths these camps, these directors, these soldiers at these camps, think about the lengths that they went to remove dignity from the prisoners. You could even compare it to um, Auschwitz or other Holocaust camps and talk about the dignity that the Nazis took away from the Jewish community and why that was so important to the demoralization of the Jews, or whatever it is that you're trying to say. But this one is all about dignity, which was a huge theme in the book. Okay, there's a particular phrase in the book that is really important, and it basically says they remained sovereign over their own souls. In what way? Here Louis was a prisoner, and basically every aspect of his life was controlled. What he wore, what he ate, how he acted, his daily routine, everything was controlled. And yet, he remained sovereign over his own soul. What does that even mean? How is that important to his survival? How is it important to the survival of the other members who survived? So that's, that one requires you to basically define what does that even mean, and then talk about how it's important. And when I say define, I don't mean like get out Webster's dictionary. I mean, what do you think it means? What does that mean to you? Okay. In the next one, um, it says research how the governments and citizens of Germany and Japan have regarded their nation's conduct during and after the war. Okay, this is a topic that is quite sensitive even today, 60 plus years later. Gosh, almost 80 years later. Man, I'm old. But anyway, even almost a century later, this is an issue of great shame and embarrassment for both countries, Japan and Germany. What made it that way? How did the governments of Japan and Germany act after the war? Talk about the general population. This book makes a great point at the end of talking about just how little the Japanese citizenry knew about what was going on. They didn't even have any idea half the time that these sorts of atrocities were going on in their own home country. And it's the same thing with a lot of Germans. People wanted to get angry at German people. How could you be okay with this? How could you live in a country that was allowing this to happen to prisoners? And a lot of the citizens were like, we didn't know. It's not like our government told us. So talk to me about that mindset, about what was going on in both of those countries after the war. Okay. In the next one, the author writes, perhaps some guards forced their prisoners to live in maximally dehumanizing conditions, blah, 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 so that they could reassure themselves that they were merely giving loathsome beasts their due. So basically, this topic is about how guards, the not the prisoners, but the prisonees, the guards, the ones doing the guarding, the ones creating the camps, the ones running the camps, a lot of them were documented as saying that they felt that the people that they were guarding were beneath them, that they were beasts, that they were animals, that they were somehow subhuman. And a lot of that goes back to actually the way that they were trained by their superiors to treat their enemies like they were subhuman. Why? What did that help as far as their ability to torture these people? How did that matter? How did that make a difference in the way that they were able to dehumanize their opponents? Is that something that is necessary in war, or is that something that tyrants go out of their way to uh, instill in their troops? So, anyway, that's what that topic's about. So, you see evidence in this book of at least one guard in particular who gets really uncomfortable with the treatment of these prisoners and even goes out of their way to give them extra food or extra help when they can. So clearly, there was some knowledge that what was going on was not right. And yet, other guards, like the bird, for example, were just absolute animals, absolute monsters to these prisoners. So what's the difference in these guards? How do we have this guard over here who's like, I'm going to sneak food into these prisoners because this ain't right? And then how do we have guards like the bird? Where's all of this coming from? So do some research on some of these characters and some of these practices that countries like Nazi Germany and Japan during World War II, some of the trainings that they gave their soldiers to make sure that their soldiers would be able to carry out these acts. Okay, so in the next one has the idea of the superior race. Okay, both Japan and Germany during World War II taught their soldiers, taught their people that they were the superior race, the Aryan race for the Germans. That they were right, that they were virtuous, and that their higher power, be it God or whoever, would see them through to victory because they were right. That's what they believed anyway. So where did this idea of the superior race come from? Where did Hitler come up with this? Where did Japan come up with this? And how did they preach this doctrine to their people, to their soldiers, so effectively to the point where the soldiers and the people believed these things? So there's that one. The next one is the topic of eugenics, which is basically selective breeding. It's the idea that you can mess around with breeding and you can mess around with genes in such a way to create offspring that are genetically superior to other people's offspring. There's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of stuff that's gone on throughout the years about eugenics. So there's a lot of research out there about some experiments and things like that, and the perils of eugenics and so on and so forth. So some people are for it, some people are against it. For example, if you knew that research could wipe away certain birth defects from the gene pool by messing with your baby's genes while they're in the womb, would you be all for it? Or is that a bit sketchy? I don't know. You tell me. So, anyway. And then the last one, and again, you can read these. I'm just giving you a very brief overview of each of these, but I want you to go into more detail, read each of these prompts, make sure that you answer all of the different components. Okay. I'm just trying to keep these videos 10 minutes or so. So, make sure that you're reading each prompt thoroughly and answering it thoroughly. And then last but not least, Phil's mother received a telegram announcing that Phil was missing in action. And this one is asking you to document, to research the practices of Army or whatever branch of military you want to go for, present day policies for notifying next of kin. So what are some safety protocols? And it doesn't have to be just notifying next of kin, but you could do research into any sort of safety protocol. What is the military protocol for next of kin notification? What is the military protocol for ensuring that there aren't deaths during training exercises or, whatever. Look at military procedures for soldiers. And you can do some research and you can have different paragraphs for different types of procedures that they have, medical procedures, physical training procedures, what are some do's and don'ts at boot camp, for example. Because those have changed over the years. It used to be drill sergeants could physically abuse their soldiers. And now, I could be wrong, but now I believe they're not allowed to lay a finger on them. So what's changed? So research some of that and tie it into the training procedures that Louis and the other soldiers had to go through in the book. For each one of these prompts, I think I mentioned or I tied back to the book in each one, but I may not have now that I'm thinking about it. But for each one of these, you have to tie them back, even though you're doing modern research over these topics. I want you to tie each one back to the novel. For example, the idea of eugenics and the Nazis. How did that play a role in this book? There was that time when Louis went to Berlin for the Olympics. There was that time when he's in Japan and he's being treated as inferior. Now he's being forced to run a race with Japanese soldiers because they found out that he's this track star and they wanted to prove that they were superior to him. So talk to me about those things. Tie those back into the topics at hand. So for each one of these, I want to see you tie each one back into the book, Unbroken, as well as the modern day research that you can find. So those are your topics. And remember, once again, I want to emphasize that with Unbroken, there is a young adult version of the book. Make sure that you don't get that because there will be test questions and reading guide questions that are going to only be found in the actual version of the book and not the young adult censored version. So keep that in mind. Okay?